Okay, we're on video, everybody. This is the Sunday video I review with Bethany, my daughter. That's Debbie. Hey, Debbie, show the little dog before you put it up.
She's hot. She wants to go.
That's a rescue dog. My daughter's been nursing it back to health, and it almost died. It was smaller than that. It's kind of gotten big. So I'm going to review the notes from Church Unlimited, and I'm glad I'm sitting here. I want you to see that wood. See that wood? This is going to fit in with some of the talk, because I got out of Church Unlimited, and those of you who watched the previous video, I showed you how I built something at my house, a little like wooden area and stuff, and I didn't want to do too much, you know, kind of waiting like next payday I'll get the rest. But I thought after church I'll go to Lowe's, and if they have a good deal on the wood, I'll show you what I built this week. I said, I just need a couple of sections to finish. So, and then my brake light also was out when I went to Bay Area or Church Unlimited. The guy said, oh, your brake light's out. Oh. So I said, well, and then I had to pick up presents because we're celebrating 3 birthdays today. So I said, okay, let me do all that. I can get it all done at once. I go to Lowe's, and I'm looking, oh, I got to get a good price on the wood. And those 2 sections, there's about 100 of them in Lowe's, you know, stacked behind the thing. And the price was $6.99 for those 2 pieces of pine. They're probably worth a little more, but I thought, that'll do it. I'll have to cut them. And so I couldn't find the little thing you carry the stuff. I'll carry them to the front. And then you get to the register, and it rings up like $11 a piece. But it said 6 a piece for those. So I said, look, this ain't the first time this happens. I said, they're all in one section. I said, nobody moved them. It's not like somebody moved something like in H-E-B and they put it in the wrong place. I said, you got like 100 pieces of wood. So I'm walking back with the guy and I'm complaining. I'm like, you know, I said, it's always more. How come it's always more? Why isn't ring up less? I said, you guys got a scam going here. And they must have thought, ooh, this guy's a problem. But once I got to the wood in Lowe's, I was right. The guy looked at it, and it wasn't like people just moved them accidentally. All 100 pieces of those pieces were behind a price that said $6.99. And then he said, I'll give them to you for $6.99. So I got 2 pieces for $6.99. But then I got the brake light. I said, can I get it done? Because this is the light that burned out. It's probably been burned out for a while. But I thought, you know, when you replace these lights, those of you that replace them, there's 2 options. There's about 3 bulbs that go in the back of the cars, you know. But some you can pull right out, but others you have to get the lands, you got to take the bolts off. And I said, I know it's going to work because of the trials that I just had at Lowe's. I know it's going to work. Well, I had to borrow my son-in-law's tools. I had to pull the whole lens off. And
Of course.
So that'll fit in a little bit with, it broke.
Okay.
That'll fit in with what we're going to talk about. In Church Unlimited, didn't I have some notes out?
Yeah, it's right on your foot.
In Church Unlimited, first I want to mention I listened to the Catholic Mass this morning at 9:30 to 10:30, okay? And every week, if you'll notice when we do these, it seems to always fit. In the Catholic Mass, I could mention all the verses, or most of them, but the one that stuck in my mind was, it comes from the Old Testament, and it's also spoken about again in the New Testament. And this is the verse. They did not read it. They sang it on the Catholic Mass, July 31st, 2016. They sang, if you hear God's voice, harden not your heart. If you hear God's voice, harden not your heart. Now, right before the Mass, I did a teaching on Saul, Samuel chapter 12 and 13, and in that teaching, I quoted that verse, and I taught that verse from Hebrews 3. So I thought that was interesting, that both the Catholic Mass and the video I made earlier, which is Samuel 12 and 13, we both used those same verses. Then in Church Unlimited, they showed the last movie of the series of movies, and Pastor Bill, he quoted from the book of Ecclesiastes. The book of Ecclesiastes is in the Old Testament, and who knows who wrote that book? It's a famous person that wrote it. Some people used to say Ecclesiastes. The word Ecclesiastes means, quote, the preacher, And that book was written by King David's son, who I also taught on today, whose son was Solomon. Solomon wrote the book of Ecclesiastes. He also wrote most of the Proverbs, and he wrote the Song of Solomon. And in the Bible, most of that is referred to as wisdom literature. And Ecclesiastes, Bill quoted, do you remember what Bill quoted on the video today, Bethany?
Not specifically, no.
Okay. Bill quoted that to everything there is a time and a purpose to everything under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to collect, a time to throw away. That's a famous song. I often misquote the people who sang that. I usually say it was Simon Garfunkel. Whoever remembers the song? To everything turn, turn, turn. To every season turn. You never heard that song? It was by the Byrds. It's a classic song by the Byrds. Bill quoted that, and also in the Mass they quoted Ecclesiastes as well. So, and the theme of some of all of these verses put together would talk about life from the viewpoint of a man. When Solomon wrote the book of Ecclesiastes, where these verses are coming from, he wrote that during a time of depression, during a time of where he said there's no meaning in life. Some of the famous verses from that book are, even atheists use this book of the Bible to kind of say, see, we're right. How could atheists use a book in the Bible to say, because Solomon writes in that book, man is like an animal. When he dies, he's done. There's nothing left. It's like you bury him in the ground, because he's writing it from that viewpoint. One of the verses in that book that I'm quoting from says, everything is in a cycle. There is nothing new under the sun. Man gets up, he goes to work, he invests his money, he makes a lot of money, and then at the end of his life he dies, and then he leaves his inheritance, and who knows, maybe he leaves it to a bunch of family members who are going to squander it. Maybe it'll go, he has no control over it. That's the whole kind of theme. Now, there was a famous author, writer, in the 20th century. Some consider him the best from the 20th century. His name was Ernest Hemingway. Who ever heard of the man Ernest Hemingway?
I've heard that name.
Okay. I read a few of his books when I was in school, in our English literature, and I liked it. The one I remember well was The Old Man and the Sea, and they made a classic movie with Spencer Tracy. And it was sort of like, reminded me of Hemingway, because it was about a fisherman. I believe he's in Cuba, and he's fishing. I got the movie at the house, The Old Man and the Sea. But Ernest Hemingway wrote another novel. And he got the Pulitzer Prize, and he's very considered one of the best. The other one was called The Sun Also Rises. The Sun Also Rises. He got that verse, that title, from the book of Ecclesiastes. Okay? It says, the sun goes down, the sun comes up, and life is a drudgery. There's no meaning and no purpose. Now, Hemingway was an atheist. Why would he pick something like that? That was also one of his famous novels, The Sun Also Rises. He had a few. Hemingway is what we refer to as a nihilist. Okay? Hemingway had a home, permanent home in Cuba, sort of like The Old Man and the Sea was a Cuban fisherman. So it's kind of patterned after himself, that book, that novel, made into a movie. He also had a permanent home in Key West, Florida. Could have been there as well. It was a movie about a fisherman. And then in 1959, he bought a home in Idaho. But why? He was diagnosed with a particular type of disease, and then in 1961 he shot himself in the head with a shotgun. Hemingway, he wasn't an open, avowed atheist, but most atheists claim Hemingway, and he made statements. He said once, he put words in the characters in his books that basically said, no thinking man would believe in God. Now, of course, I deal with a lot of thinking, smart intellectuals believe in God's wrath, but Hemingway bought into that. Now, nihilism, which was a philosophy that he kind of believed in, basically taught that. I've taught this on the Philosophy Post, Sartre, Nietzsche, Freud, I've taught all this. But he grasped that viewpoint because Hemingway was a smart man. He shot himself because he was diagnosed with a particular disease, chromatosis, hemochromatosis, I believe. It's how your body breaks down iron, metabolizes iron, but also maybe like a little bit like an Alzheimer type thing. You start losing your memory. So what Hemingway said was, instead he believed in suicide. He believed in, many today say, instead of me going downhill, I'll just shoot myself. His sister shot himself that year. His brother committed suicide that year. Hemingway had some famous daughters who were actresses, who I saw. Mariel Hemingway and Margot Hemingway. One of them committed suicide. All, in his family, in his immediate family, 7 of them shot themselves. They were all influenced by the great thinker of their family, who was Ernest Hemingway, which the mindset said there is nothing new under the sun. The sun also rises. You might think that would be like a title of some hope. No, when he wrote it from his perspective, he said, nothing changes. It's all the same. Therefore, if life gets bad, you have the right to take your own life. That was his viewpoint. That was Hemingway's viewpoint. And today, in the verses from all of them put together, some of them were from that book of Ecclesiastes, but the viewpoint, the other one we mentioned, if you hear God's voice, harden not your heart. These people did not hear the voice of God because they rejected God. They did not believe in God. And that philosophy, which we call nihilism, says there is no hope. Because that philosophy basically says there's no purpose to a person's life. Humans are like animals. In essence, they just have certain things and then they die, and that's the viewpoint. There's nothing left. And if that is true, according to their view, then if you do get sick or you do go through problems, if the pain gets too hard, life is of no value. So kill yourself before things get too bad. But the Christian perspective is man is made in the image of God, and life has value, and man does not have the right to take life, whether it's the issue of abortion and so forth. So today, even though the movie at Church Unlimited was an interesting movie, now I'll look, there might be a few notes I want to mention, but in the movie, I think it was called Out of Time, and it talked about how you go back. It seemed like a neat movie, but it talked about, Bill even mentioned it, that time is short in life. Okay, that was kind of one of the things. And Pastor Bill talked from Psalms, I think 39, but we find a lot of verses also in Ecclesiastes about the shortness of life. Vanity, vanity, everything's vanity. That was a quote from Ecclesiastes. Harden not your heart. I'm looking at my notes. I wrote them throughout the day. The other verse they used in the Mass I just saw was from the Gospel of Luke, and it was a man who started making a lot of money, and things were going real well. And Jesus told this parable. It was a story. And the man said, I'm making it. I'm succeeding so well that I'm building a new storehouse of all my goods. And then Jesus said, but that night the man died. The man's soul was required of him. And Jesus said, then who will get those things that he made? It's the same verse from Ecclesiastes. A person dies, even if he's very successful, people will fight over the inheritance. And I'm grateful that I don't have a lot of inheritance for my kids to fight over. Whoever wants the car, that's about an $800 inheritance that you will collect. So there's time for everything. I think I covered most of it. Let me look real quick. Okay, and I guess I'll end with one last point. It's funny, my daughter, kidding around, she asked me when we went to church, she said to me, is that skin cancer, Dad? And I told my daughter, I said, no, I told everybody on the video, I was in the bathtub one morning early, and I smoke. and I dropped the actual cigarette on my face. This was about a month ago. I told this is not new. Everybody knows I told it. So I burnt my face, but then I picked it, over the last couple of months. I just keep going like that. But that's how I got it. It wasn't in the movie. The father is diagnosed with cancer, and then they realize the shortness of life. And the father makes a statement, says, "Well, I smoked my whole life," but the whole theme was the brevity of life. Okay? Do we find purpose? Do we find meaning in life? And if it's just about hedonism, which is the philosophy of life is about just feeling good. I have some of my friends that you've seen on the videos, talented friends, most of their life, either chasing after math or whatever it was, a lot of that time is consumed with that's called hedonism. I just want to feel as good as I can, eat as much as I can, whatever it is. But that's really, that life is, in essence, valueless. But from the viewpoint of the nihilists, there's no real meaning, so get as much as you can, and even if you have to step on other people's toes on the way up, heads on the way up the ladder, which the philosophers, Freud, taught these types of things, it said it's all right. Because they said, there's nothing wrong with it. If I have to step on somebody else up the ladder, there's no value to that other person that I step on. That's all fake. There's no such thing as right and wrong. That's what they were teaching. And that led to a lot of disastrous things. I watched a movie, I'll end with this. It was a true story, but Grandma, my mother, when I was in New Jersey a year or two ago, she said, "Oh, Johnny, watch this old movie." And she always talked about it, and it was a true story of these college students. And these college students, as I sat and watched it with Grandma, these college students were in a course. And now Grandma didn't know any of this. She just liked it because it was a true murder story. And as I'm sitting there watching it, it was maybe made in the 1940s or 50s, I'm watching these two students, and the movie was made like in the 50s. And they're listening to their course instructor. And then they go out, true story, and they murder some boy. And after they murder the boy, one of them dropped his glasses at the scene, and throughout the movie, they try to figure out who murdered the boy. And at the end, the story was about these two students were in a course of philosophy that taught everything that I said. And they said there's no meaning. And therefore, the one boy, they eventually were caught and convicted. But the one boy said, if I kill another, it's just a body. But the other one felt guilty. And at the end, I told my mom or Grandma, I said, "Mom, this was about a lot of the things I teach." And she wasn't aware of it. She just said, "Oh, see how they caught him because they found his glasses?" I said, "No, this whole movie, which was made years earlier, it showed you the end result of that belief system, which is do what you want. There is no accountability." And that would be the end result. And Hemingway, his daughter, also shot herself. And so that viewpoint, obviously, he had influence within his family because he was so famous. Ecclesiastes, Solomon wrote it, but a couple of wisdom points was life is short. And do the best that you can. One quote from Ecclesiastes, it said, at the end of the book, King Solomon, who wrote it, said, "This is the final word," he said, "to obey God, to keep his commandments." That was what he found at the end of that search, because he was on a journey as he wrote that book, his own life. He said, but it's to remember God in the days of your youth, before the older days come, to obey God. That was the end of man, to do his will. The old Protestants, called the Reformers, they had the term to live each day like you're in the face of God. Each day understanding that God is there. And so that would be the conclusion. You have so much time to fulfill your destiny, and it's much more than simply obtaining a lot of stuff, okay? It's to fulfill God's will. All right, we'll end with that.
Good deal.
Anybody want to make any comments? Sometimes we talk on the videos. Nobody?
Good
I'm
one.
good.
I'm good.
That's it. Now, I told Anthony and Andy, I said whenever they want, they could sit in, but I don't want to make them feel like they got to sit in. So that would be it. That was the final word. You use your time well, okay? God bless everybody. We went 20 minutes. That's it.